Thank you, Dave. Thanks for that introduction. Obviously, good evening, Wayne. It's nice that you've joined us, and thank you very much for your time this evening. Clearly, Matt, when we practiced this morning, didn't have any issues whatsoever, but the old IT gremlins have got in there, unfortunately. So, Wayne, if I can come to you, obviously, just with the current situation we're in, can you give us a bit of a flavour of what you've been up to and what you've been keeping yourself occupied with?
Yeah, well, first of all, good evening, everyone. I hope you're well. And no surprise, once again, Matt Carley dropping me in the shit. The amount of times he's ran touch for me and done the same. So tonight is no different. So thank you, Matt. Oh, there he is. There's Mr. Happy himself. I was just saying, Matt, what a wonderful touch that you are, and great always to be working with you. Patsy, it's interesting times. Matt and I are both furloughed at the moment, but it doesn't mean we're not staying fit. We're not, staying on top of things. There's been a lot of work with World Rugby that's been going on around changes in the breakdown interpretations, but also, more importantly, just staying in touch with each other and making sure that we're all doing all right. And Tony Spreadbury, our boss, is leading that, and we got together this afternoon. Is one of our regular dates, and you can guarantee with Spread as a boss, it will always be loud. Let's put it that way. It's good, but it's also good to come and join you this evening. And so thanks very much for the invite.
No, thanks, Barnsey, for that. Matt, I take you can hear and see us now, and you're up with the IT. What have you been up to? I take it a bit of homeschooling's been coming in there as well for you.
Yeah, I've been doing the Year 3 curriculum with my son, and trying to pin down my 3-year-old girl. So, just to be fair, just enjoying the sunshine. I don't know whether Wayne said a similar kind of thing, but starting to enjoy the things that we take for granted. So living down by the seaside, spending a lot of time when we could only do an hour, spending an hour a day at the beach or going to the woods, or just spending time outside and actually doing things that don't cost money, which is quite strange that we take this kind of thing to sort of learn how to do that without play centres and adventure days out and stuff like that being open to take the kids to. It's actually learning that you can do it the old-fashioned way. And today we spent 2 hours at the tennis courts, and the boy just run around playing tennis, and it's probably something I'd have never done with him before this time. So it's been brilliant. And then obviously the bits and pieces Wayne said, we've been sort of just keeping in touch with the rugby and doing enough fitness to keep ticking over, so that when we do get started, we're not 2 or 3 weeks away when we get the go.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Well, let's crack into the meat of the evening. We're clearly here, as the title says there, to talk about the Scrum and get some tips from the top. So we're going to be relying on you guys for doing that for us. A couple of themes for the evening. We're going to look at some pre-match briefs, some pre-match chat, getting the setup right, and also talking about a good height of the engagement. But clearly we want the guys and girls who are online with us tonight to feed into us and ask us questions. So what we're going to be doing is making sure that every time or before we play a clip, and just incidentally, all the clips are from the community game this evening. We've avoided any top end stuff so that people will recognise what's going on. But we want that audience participation. So you guys have got the opportunity to tell us how you ref the Scrum and ask Barnsey and Matt around how they've learnt and developed their skills. So before we do any more, let's have a look at Scrum in action.
Go to hold, go there, boards, here we go. Hold, and two, hold, and touch, sink, bind, set. 1, 2, 3, 4. Steady. Keep it up. Ball's gone, gents, ball's gone.
So, Patsy, it's interesting that one of the first questions that's jumped up is from Andy Randall, who says you're dealing with the supposed top players in the position. You've just seen that clip, and the clips that everyone will see tonight will not be of the Premiership. They won't be of international. They will be from the games that the majority of you are coaching or playing or refereeing in, because we want you to recognise that game. And what we've just seen there is a scrum, exactly what it should be. It's a good competition, but it's a platform to get a really good attacking platform. And that game, I think, was Kettering versus Bourneville, and the orange team there makes a decent break into 22 from a really good set piece. So what we want to do tonight is not talk to you about, how you referee a tight head versus loose head battle on the wet at Kingsholm. What we want to do is try and give you some tips to ensure that when you have these contests, when we get back to rugby, that they're cracking contests and you add value to them. So I know there'll be questions about, well, why don't you referee to put in international rugby, or why do you allow them to smash through the market international rugby? What we want to do is give you some real practical guidance around how you can add to your games the next time you go out, whether that be as a ref or whether that be as a coach to help the referee get some really good pictures, or whether it's a player to understand what us as referees are looking for.
Cheers, Barnsley. Thanks for that. Matt, any thoughts from yourself? Anything to add to what Wayne's just been saying there?
Yeah, so just scrolling through a few of the questions as well. There's one here from Tony Bowers from the Bristol Referee Society, talking about aspiring referees sometimes having little or no playing experience. And one of the key things that we're going to talk about tonight is obviously how we interact with the players before, during and after the game. And one of the things that myself and Barnsley, think is really key is the talking to players. So the best way to gain information and to build your knowledge and understanding is through talking to players. So don't be scared to talk to the players, especially after the game. Understand what they thought and how they thought the scrum went. And you can always add information week on week to your knowledge and understanding. And I think it's a little bit of a myth. Obviously, it helps if you've been able to play in that front row, but very few referees across the game have played in the front row. So the best way to add to that knowledge is to talk to those who are in there on the coalface. So just don't be scared to talk to players, because they're not all as mean as they seem.
Thanks, Matt. Let's go into that next stage then. Let's go into that pre-match brief. We're going to come up with a video in a moment, which is quite a quick video, and it's Luke Haskins who's talking to some players and briefing them. But what we want to get from you guys in the audience is, in the chat box, tell us what you think is important when you're talking to the players in your pre-match brief, and perhaps also what you avoid and why you would avoid it. But let's play the video and we'll see what comes in the chat. Tell us.
Hi lads, my name's Luke. I'm the referee for today's game. I just want to talk to you about today's scrummage and making sure that you enjoy it, but it's safe. Okay? What I want you to do, when I call crouch, you go ear to ear, not further apart. That's purely for safety reasons. I'll then call bind. I need to see your arm on the back or on the side of the opposition shirt, not on the arm. I need to see shoulders above hips. Happy with that? Okay. Once I'm happy with those two commands, I'll call set. We're looking for the team to push square and through the mark. Okay, happy? Yeah. Enjoy the game, guys.
So that was quite succinct in what Luke was getting over there. He obviously went through the safety side of things, and just we'll give people a couple of seconds to come in on the chat and just give us an idea of what they would be talking to the players about, and then saying if there's anything that they would avoid, why they would avoid that. But just thinking from your perspective, Matt, just what's your sort of priorities around that pre-match brief?
I think what you've got written there is probably a real good beginner's guide, a real good starting point, and probably the non-negotiables which we should all be looking to buy into. I think it's important that you have a real good think through and make your pre-match briefing individual to yourself. Mm-hmm. But obviously we need to have a nice balance between where we want to be in terms of safety and the outcomes we want to get from the scrum in terms of like what Wayne said, in terms of a platform to restart the game, get the ball into play for teams to attack from, or to allow a team to be strong and use the scrum as a weapon. So, I mean, player buy-in, really essential. So how do we get them players engaged? Quite often you hear referees, when we go to society meetings, joking and laughing about how players don't listen during a briefing, and they feel like they only do it because they have to do it. So how do we turn the tables on them? How do we engage the players? And I think that's always through getting a bit of player buy-in and speaking to them on a level which isn't dictating to them, but making them feel part of it. So giving them some ownership. Easy points that you can reference during the game. So there are times when we have to refer to what we've spoken to before the game, or have key points of reference in terms of height and stability. So using them words and being able to carry them words into the game when we're under pressure and when we're fatigued. Not overkilling the briefing. Again, that keeps the players engaged, but the players don't want to feel like you're buying into 5 or 10 minutes of their time before the game. So making sure you're succinct but covering everything you want. And then being able to link part of your briefing to previous experiences or your knowledge of teams. So I know it's not always readily available at different levels of the game, but what information do you have, whether that be video footage, talking to other referees, or talking to players from other clubs, so that you can have a little bit of information to take to a player or a team about their scrum from previous weeks or previous experiences you've had with them.
Brilliant. You covered a whole lot there. There's a few questions coming in, Barnes, if I may. There's one which I find interesting, is around that building that trust. Obviously, Matt talks there around that ownership for the players, getting their buy-in. But it's also getting them to trust you when you're giving the calls or varying the times of the calls. How do you sort of get that across?
I like working with Matt. You know, I ran touch for Matt this year in the Six Nations, so you get opportunity to hear how other people do it. And so what's really nice, one of Matt's first comments is, "What do you want from me today?" You know, obviously they all want penalties. Building that trust straight away, and you're right. Interesting that one of the questions came in from Nick Wood. Nick Wood, Gloucester and District referee, but also played a few times for Gloucester at Lucid.
Not by yourself, Barnsley.
Well, he liked Luke's briefing, first of all. So, Luke, big tick for you. But then he said anything about adding trust. So, fellas, ladies, this is your first opportunity to meet the players. You're in a changing room or you're on the side of the pitch, and it's your first chance to, Paul Wilson says, make sure you catch their eye. What a great piece of advice for us all. Paul Gaskin says they don't want it to be robotic. It's perfect. It's exactly the kind of information we want. And everyone's talking about it just being brief and to the point. And there's obviously a couple of coaches on here as well who are talking about just keeping to the point. Don't tell me how to scrummage. Don't tell me, the insides and outsides of your knowledge of a law book. Tell me what you're going to deliver. And I really like a couple of comments from Julian. And Julian, I'm going to get your name wrong, but Kazanave. He talks about stability, and we'll touch upon that in a moment. But for me, all I talk about is about stability. Just stability at every single stage. Because that, to me, is what I can tell the players I will do, and to buy into what Matt says. Ability for me to deliver what I'm going to say. What I say is I will give you stability at every single stage. And that's me saying, trust me, I'm going to do that.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks. Dave, just obviously we've been chatting a fair bit there. Is there any sort of other themes that are coming through on the questions you're picking up on?
I think Wayne's picked up on a lot of them. A lot of people giving their own thoughts on what they share in their pre-match briefings. I think a lot of the points are around how do you balance what you need to get across, what are your absolute non-negotiables, with the time that the players have got and the time that the coaches want to spend before the game. Have you got any tips for when you give that briefing so as not to, take away that time from coaches?
I think it's important that when we first arrive at the ground, it's probably a real easy thing that you learn quite early on is that you go and find the coach and speak to them about when's going to be best for them. But you want it to be a little bit on your timetable as well. So that's you're going to them, ask them when best suits them, and preferably in the dry, inside in the warmer environment of the changing room. Again, it sounds really silly, but quite often the coaches might say, "Oh, we'll do it outside," or they might want to be difficult with it. So it's just, look, let's do it inside. Let's do it at a time that suits you, which doesn't interrupt with any of the players pre-match, and so that they can be not thinking about going outside or missing 5 minutes of the warm-up, so that they're nice and relaxed as well. I did pick up one of the comments on here that said, why don't we wait until just before the first scrum and we can brief both teams together? Again, to get the detail that we want and to get buy-in from both teams, I don't think that's possible. Quite often, you hear people talking about players forget what you've said by the time they get round to the first scrum. But I know personally, I think you get better buy-in if it's a nice, relaxed and unrushed conversation rather than being something which is buying into their time or something which you feel rushed and you miss something and you can't quite deliver in the way that you want to. And just to touch on a couple of the things that I've read on here, it says in the community game we have from Rob Chamberlain. Community game, quite often teams will see the same referee. So how do we not breed familiarity? So that comes back to our point of, can you refer back to a positive situation that you've had with a prop, or even what you may perceive as a negative experience with that prop where you've had to penalise them a few times for a negative action? Well, look, this is what happened last time. I've reviewed it. Maybe I didn't get them all right, but there was occasions where you were wrong. How can we work together to make sure it's better today so we can both have more of a positive experience? And I think sometimes you can say that being too over familiar can be a dangerous thing, but I think if knowledge sometimes and having a bit of personal feeling for the player and what they go through can also help you quite significantly.
And I think, Matt, that ties in with Pat Colombo's point from Horsham, who said, how do you deal with the coaches? Well, they're as part of making this work as anyone else. You know, refs, coaches and players all have to work together to get these scrums working, to get the game working. So if he wants to be there, let him be there. Again, it's your first interaction with the coaches. You want these coaches to trust you. Going back to Nick Wood's point, you know, let the players trust you from as early as you can. And that probably ties in with a point around briefing before the match. You want to start building those relationships.
Absolutely. And I mean, Simon Boyle comes in there and asks about the players. Do you invite the players to ask you questions? I think both the comments you're making there, both Matt and yourself, Wayne, is around building that conversation and encouraging that ownership. Therefore, you will allow them to ask those questions.
Yeah, well, I would always come to it. So I'll ask them at the start of my briefing. Again, like Wayne said, what do you want from me, or what's any thoughts from you before we start? And then at the end of the briefing, it's just that little bit of buying. Like, are we happy and all agreed on that? And 9 times out of 10, maybe they might answer yes, so that they can finish it. But sometimes they might say, actually, there's something else I wanted to add. But it also gives you that bit of ownership. And I also try and say to the players, look, I don't want to get into a situation where you're frustrated with me and I'm frustrated with you. So if I don't do something that I promised you before the game, so if I don't give you that time between crouch and bind, or between the bind and the set to move your feet so you're nice and stable before setting the scrum and I don't give you that opportunity and I rush you, you have to tell me at that point, look, please, can I have a little bit longer to between the bind and the set so that I can be stable? That's something we discussed before the game. And there's no point in having that agreement with the players if they feel you're not holding up your side of the agreement, if you're not going to allow them just to voice that to you, as long as they do that in a way which is approachable and acceptable. And if they're going to open that conversation, that they listen to the answer and you can speak to each other rather than you penalising them for collapsing and then beginning to feel frustrated that you haven't done what you've said before the game without having a voice.
And it probably ties in, Matt, with a couple of questions about briefing front rows together. I think if you allow both front rows to be together, the candidness won't be there. The players aren't going to say, look, we really want to have a crack at their scrum play, so you tell us what you want, or we had a problem with their loose head when we played them 3 weeks ago. You want that relationship. So to those who've asked those questions, that probably answers that.
Could be interesting if you did brief them together and someone did say that, right?
Yeah, true. I'm not quite sure whether it would happen or not. Fellas, we've covered a lot there around the front row briefing, our pre-match briefing. I think it's important we try and move on because clearly time's going to run away with us. Otherwise, there are really some great questions coming in there. But if we're going to move on to another video, we're going to start talking about the setup and balance. So that really takes us into that next phase, as it were. We're actually looking at the scrum in action. So what I'd ask the guys and girls in the audience to do is to put in the chat again, what are you looking for in this period of the scrum? So in this phase, what are the audience looking for? But I'll play the video and let them see that, and then put in the chat their questions.
Josh, again, please.
Happy with the gap? Crouch! Bind! We know, guys, I don't move on with the cause until I'm happy both sides are ready, okay? So let's wait for them. We agreed on that in the brief.
So, ground ball. Keep moving in here, boys. Just keep it in. One, low. 2. Double one.
Crouch! Bind! Set! Nice and easy, nice and easy.
So, Patsy, I'm going to go back to my mate, Julian Cazenave. I've probably changed his name already, and I've only said it once. He said, one aspect missing for me is stability. And if you go to the first of those 2 scrums, one aspect that was missing for me and for the referee on this day was stability. Lots of people have asked around, if you have lots of collapses and if you have lots of resets or if you have to start making lots of decisions. The aim of the stability is to make sure, or to at least give the scrum the best opportunity of succeeding. So what we want to do is make sure that everyone's stable, everyone's comfortable, everyone's got their feet in the grass, everyone's got their binds nice and strong. So if you looked at that first clip, referee said crouch, and then the team to the right as I'm looking at it, who eventually got the dominance, weren't stable. They overbalanced. And I think this was the first scrum of the game. So this is a great opportunity to say, look, in the change room, when we built our trust, when you asked me what you wanted, when I asked you what you wanted, and you asked me what I wanted, and I said I want balance, we haven't got that. We now need that for the rest of the game. So I really like that piece of refereeing. Hold on, let's get this right. Stability. We still then had a dominant scrum, but it was from a legal platform. So real nice stability at every stage, balanced and stable until the ball was in.
Brilliant.
Yeah, just to pick up on a question from Gareth Pearson. He said, after the briefing, how long do you wait until you sanction from a scrum infringement? Well, I don't think we ever want to get to a stage where we're refereeing by a set of numbers and where we're giving a team 1, 2, 3 attempts before we then penalise them, because coaches are definitely smart, and all front row players are that clever, but the coaches will pick up on it and they'll set their teams up accordingly. But I like Wayne, I like this piece of refereeing. It's sensible, given that it's the first scrum of the game and it gets a really good positive outcome. If this is the 3rd or 4th occasion that we've tried to set a scrum, and on the first occasion this team have lent across the mark, you know that you've got the option to free kick, or even if they do it on the second occasion here. Obviously, you have the option there to have done it on the first scrum, but like we said, it's a nice, calm, measured piece of refereeing. And back to what we said about the pre-match brief, the referee's got a reference point from what he's discussed in the change room, which he can easily go back to without feeling under any pressure, and that the players can understand. I assume he's not using any different language to what he's discussed before the game, and he gets a really good positive response from the players, and by no doubt he will build a lot of trust with that set of players.
And a nice point here from Clint Jacobs, who's tuning in from Western Province, and wouldn't it be nice to be in Cape Town now? But he says apply patience, and I presume by that balance and stability on all three calls. And I think that's really important. It's crouch, get your balance, everyone. Bind, get your balance again, everyone. And then set. And we'll talk about stability on set in a moment. But again, back to Clint's point, get your stability, everyone. The more stability we have at Scrum, the better chance we have of seeing that, going back to that first Scrum of Bourneville versus Kettering, we've got a better chance of that Scrum succeeding, giving us that platform that we want. So patience, balance, call it what you want, use your own terminology, but take your time in setting it up. Not to the point of being pedantic, but to make sure that everyone's still and balanced.
Just coming in there, Matt, if I can ask you, we've got a question in from Jonathan Whitfield from Pacific Northwest over in the States that he talks about the different surfaces, whether it be 4G, grass, turf. Do you have a different sort of view on trying to get that balance around? Do you do it any differently on different surfaces?
I think I did read that question. I'm going to put it to one side just until we get onto the next stage, because I think we're going to talk about height. But seeing as we're on the question now that Jonathan's brought it to our attention, I think the height of the scrum becomes more important when the surface becomes more uneven and probably a bit softer and a bit wetter. So height of the scrum, we will talk about the players hitting up, and obviously heads needing to be above hips for safety reasons, so that the scrum, we get a good platform. But the balance and the height are directly linked. And obviously if we're on turf pitches and the pitch is particularly wet underfoot, or we've got a little bit of water on the pitch, then we definitely would encourage the players to come a lot higher. And obviously we might be a bit harsher on and quicker with the sanctions if we don't get that kind of response, when it's going to directly have more of a direct effect on the safety. But I think something to do with the different types of surfaces is definitely something to do with the height, but then height is obviously directly linked to balance, in terms of if the players go too low, they're not going to be able to support their weight. They're either going to rely on players to hold them back, or they're going to be leaning their weight on the opposition. So, linked to what we're going to talk about next. But interesting point. And obviously with the 4G pitches, we all know our life can be easier with scrums, but it definitely doesn't mean that the scrum is there for us on a plate. We still have to do a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. Any other questions you'll pick up on there, Barnsley?
There's just lots of good input as well, and lots of people talking about stability, about taking time. A few questions around what about when you get a dominant scrum? And here you clearly have a dominant scrum. But what the referee also does nicely here, as soon as that scrum's down, and back, if we went back to one of the first messages in our briefing was, if I'm not happy, I'm blowing my whistle, whether that's before the scrum or during the scrum. As soon as it becomes unsafe, and particularly attention at age grade rugby, I'm going to blow my whistle. Here, the scrum goes to the floor because of the dominance and the inability of the team on the left to keep that scrum up. They caused the collapse by not staying in that contest. Then he blows his whistle. It's not waiting when that scrum's on the floor. So, if you do have dominant teams, of course you can say to that dominant team that you've got to keep them up as well, but you've got to tell that defending team, that you've got to stay in this contest. You can go, I've said this to many a team. It doesn't just happen at level 9. I've said this at internationals. You can go backwards, you can go forwards, but you can't go on the floor. So stay in the contest.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about that balance at every stage and not moving on until the previous stage is complete. So, and a few of the sort of points are coming in around that. The fact that the players, Chloe Langdale, who's a player, is saying that she prefers it when the referee actually waits and is quite strict around that, because it gives the players confidence. So that's really reinforcing what we're talking about there. So we've talked about the balance and the stability, and we're going to look now at stability on the set. So what I'll ask the guys and girls in the audience to do is to, when you get to the set, so once we've watched this video, once you get to that set, what are your priorities at that point, and what are you looking for from the scrum? So let's play the video and see what people think.
We need to be balanced, guys. We need to be balanced. Crouch. Bind. Set. Stand. Okay, gents. From the hip, we're still moving, okay? We need to be balanced. We need to hold that shot, okay? We need to stop the movement on this side with you, okay? There's your mark. Let's go. 2 seconds. Crouch. Bind. Set. Scrum. It's back.
I guess we ought to ask you, Barnsley, because the one team with the under 20s from Gloucester, I think the prop on this side played in the under 15s game the week before, didn't they? So,
yeah, it was quite interesting when I saw this clip. It reminded me of my days back in the Forest of Dean when I would turn up as an under 15-year-old, and the opposition team from, I won't name the teams from Drybrook who I used to play with, but they would turn up on their motorbikes and their cars, and I'd be like, today, and that tight head looked like he was a decent, solid bloke. But if you looked at that tight head as well, his feet movement in the first scrum was constant. There was constant movement, and again, really nice from the referee. Blew his whistle. Not happy. It's not going to work. Please balance every stage. Great, and then set and stability. And then you saw the scrum half waited, and then the ball came in, and then they had a proper crack at them. And they disrupted the ball. That's really good ball for Gloucester here. I think they actually pick it up by the looks at the end of that clip. But even if Green get that ball, that's a result for Gloucester under 20s here. Disrupted ball, and any coach would take that. And someone, I think it's Pierce Young from My Society up in London now. Any tips on the timing of the scrum half's feed if you're not happy with stability? Pierce, for me, tell him, don't put the ball in until it's stable. If you do, mate, you're running the risk of me free kicking you, because you can't put the ball in until it's square and stable. So I'd be saying to the night, let it settle. If it settles quickly, of course you can. But I'm not going to be allowing you to smash into an engagement and put the ball in at the same time. So I thought, again, really nice piece of refereeing, waiting, stability, balance. We're back to that word balance, getting that stability on set.
Okay. You pick up anything from the questions, Matt?
Yeah, I think just a point made by Duncan Butler from the London Society. It's looking at the cues that we get before the ball comes in. So quite often referees can fall into the habit of, so you say set and then your job's done until the ball comes in. But there's lots of things we can pick up on before the ball comes in. And if we get the bits before the ball comes in right, then decision-making becomes a lot easier. And actually decision-making becomes a lot less, because if we get good stability on that set without players moving, any moving parts, then you've got more of a good opportunity for a strike and more opportunities for a play away, especially for a team who might be under pressure. So talking about teams who quite often, if you lower levels down, you might get one team who's dominant, but they'll be dominant from the start and throughout. Well, the best way to give it an equal opportunity for teams to play away from the scrum is to get the stability. So let's insist on that stability from a dominant side, because you've got to be legal as well if you want to be dominant. Just because you're stronger than the other team doesn't give you the right to push the other side before the ball comes in. So stability and height and nice patience on your calls, and making sure that you haven't got decisions to make before the ball comes in. And good, clear pictures will give you the best opportunity to see if you need to see something, and it also gives an opportunity for a team to strike the ball and play away quickly, and not disadvantage what is perceived to be a weaker scrum.
Cheers, Matt. Barnsley, Matt mentioned there about good, clear pictures, and we use sort of language occasionally which other people may not understand. So when we're talking about good, clear pictures, what sort of things are we looking for?
So what I mean by good, clear pictures as well is the props painting a picture for me or showing me that they are trying to do everything that they can to be legal. So we've mentioned them many a time, but I want them to be stable. I want them, when I say bind, to bind at down to the hips. And there's some questions about different size props. Well, they might be slightly different heights at that point, but I still want them to be bent at the hips. I want them to be stable there. I don't want any up and down movements. I want them to show me they're in control. On bind, I want them to show me they've clearly got a bind on the top of the shirt. Discussions again around long arm, short arm bind. They've got to be on the shirt. They can't be on the arm. Anyone who starts to bind on the bicep, top of the arm area, for me, starting to paint a bad picture, of showing me that they might be illegal. So then I've got that. I'm waiting for them to get their feet in the ground. I'm waiting for them to get comfortable. I want their feet in the ground. Then when I say set, I go back to that picture there. I want that prop to engage. I want to go stable, and I want to see his feet underneath him and not chasing, so not running forward. So, and someone's mentioned it earlier on, and sorry, it's about 400 questions up. I'm talking about long-leggedness. If you think about a prop engaging with his feet a long way back, there is a potential that he's going to end up on his face. So I want that prop. I want his or her feet underneath him. So there are some really telltale clues, all before I say get the ball in. And we'll talk about height in that picture now, but lots of clues for me about when it might go right, when it might go wrong. Other potential clips, and I only pick these up from listening to the players in the clubhouse afterwards, or listening to coaches. Ideas of players tucking their shoulders. You think about a tight head who should be nice and square, but all of a sudden he wants to start off at an angle because he's a bit vulnerable. So again, back to Duncan's point about some cues beforehand. That's a really good picture for me. Can you make sure you're straight, please? We're going a little bit off the stability point, but all those preset clues that I can have paint a really nice picture for me.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we try and sort of sum up a little bit here. Just we've talked about that investing in the setup. We've talked about the good pictures, and we're going to go on and talk about the engagement at a good height. But really, this sort of gives people that picture of a bit of a process that they can go through, just as an easy, ready reckoner to in someone's mind. Matt, you talked about when you're under pressure, etc. I did a Colts game just prior to lockdown between Hereford and Luctonians. All the kids knew each other. It was a soaking wet day. I was clearly under pressure because of the local knowledge they had, and really that pressure builds as well. So having a process you can go back to clearly helps from ourselves as referees. Have you Wayne touched on a little bit about the practicing and getting information. Is there any sort of techniques that you've used, Matt, around how you've practiced or built that knowledge?
Well, it's obviously we're in a difficult situation because you can't just go down the park and practice your scrums on a day off, can you? So
no.
But just watching as much rugby as possible, and then picking out the bits that you find most relevant or most important to you. So we quite often challenge ourselves when we're in all together on a Premiership weekend at Twickenham. We will, if there's someone's had a tricky sequence of scrums, whether it be 5-metre scrums or a tricky set of scrums which has led to a yellow card, we'll sit and we'll watch them all together. And it's not about picking out the rights or wrongs or indifference. It's how we can be more collaborative and how we can suggest that as a group we can be consistent in how we manage these sequences and support the person that's been in that situation, because you don't know how you're going to deal with a set of these scrums until you're in the fire. And I think the more you do it, you can only get better by doing it more often. But you can be ready by, like I say, by watching as much rugby as possible, but trying to take away some skills or things that you like which a referee done, or even things that you didn't like that a referee done, that you could actually add to your game when you can put yourself in that situation. And like I said, watching these sequences of scrums and trying to put yourself in the person's shoes, whether it be through mental imagery or just through watching them 2 or 3 times, is really important for when you come under that kind of pressure, and you can be, whether you be the swan with your legs flapping underneath, you can let people perceive that you're nice and calm in that situation. And again, that buys trust.
I think as well, it's really easy to say, but when we have one of those difficult games and we rush, first of all, we try not to give a scrum then, don't we? And we always play a really poor advantage and just say advantage is over, and I didn't see that knock on or forward pass. But we then get panicked when we get into those scrum situations, and it happens at every level. Every game you'll get there like, I don't want another scrum. We've all been there. That challenge there of each scrum is a separate event. I don't know if any of you have been watching the test, which talks about the Australians come back from their misdemeanors down in Cape Town. But Justin Langer is the coach at the moment, and all he talks about is process. Each ball is a new ball. Get your process right. And there's a lot that we can take away from that as referees. Is, if you get your process right at scrum, it'll bloody help. Even if you're having a bad day, go back, invest in a setup, get balance, get stability on set. Doesn't matter how many scrums, how crappy the pitch, what type of pitch. Invest time in those, and you've got a better chance of succeeding.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we've talked about that. It's really just, there's some really good summary there, and some going back to process and falling back on what we know. We're now going to move into that sort of exploring engagement at a good height. So we're going to play a video again. So again, I'll ask your audience just to say what they're looking for, the key things that they look for when they're talking about height.
Crouch. Bind.
Hold.
Set. Underneath.
So, Patsy, this is a big bugbear of mine, I suppose, and that scrum ended up on the floor on engagement, almost immediately on engagement, because what I want teams to do is when they engage, I want them to be engaging at a height where they can stay up. So I've spoken about their feet being underneath them rather than too far back. So when they do engage, they've got something to push off. But I also, if you just imagine, and hopefully people can see my hand, if people start hitting downwards, any pressure just continues it downwards. And that one, we not only had down, we had down and across. So that scrum was only going one way. So what I want teams to do is engage flat or engage slightly up. Now, I know some props will say, well, we've got to keep that scrum low. That's fine. You can lower your chest afterwards, but I want that engagement at a level that you can maintain until the ball comes in. Then have that contest. So it's all about getting it right. So I don't want people too far apart. A lot of discussion about, getting players so they're not hitting too far apart. And that's a great tip. You think about it, the closer you are, the less likely you will start hitting down. So get them closer. Don't get them pre-engaged, but get them hitting. A sharp little hit in, but hitting at a good height. And the scrums that we've seen, go back again to that first clip of Kettering and Bourneville. Nice height, nice kind of engagement. And, that was going to go wrong because everyone was hitting down, everyone was hitting across. So forces a referee into making a decision. It's actually, whether or not you think the referee got it right or wrong is actually irrelevant. It's that never going to succeed.
No, brilliant. Thanks, Barney. Matt, we've had a question in from Gareth from Lincoln who talks about the height. But how do you manage a team who clearly don't want to allow stability and work with you around that height system? So if you've gone through a menu of trying to get them to come on side with you, but they're clearly not going to, what's your sort of rationale around that? Is it penalise and move on, or what's your thoughts?
No, I think the scrum may be slightly different to other areas of the game. You've got to continue to invest. So you might choose to move to sanction, and it probably sounds like in those sort of situations we've all been there, where a team is adamant they're going to go down a path, and it's not necessarily the one that you want them to do. You will use the other tools in your armoury, so we can't always be on the side of managing players. And going back to one of Wayne's initial points, this is a way of restarting the game. And if it's going to be an obstacle to restarting the game, or for a team for the ball to come into the scrummage, even to get the ball in the scrummage, then we need to take other action. So we have tools of free kicks, we have tools of long arm penalties, but we can also continue to talk to these players. So if there is a free kick, like when you come to the next scrum, it's a new event, but let's remember the last scrum, I want you higher. You wouldn't come higher. It caused problems with the stability. That's why we had a free kick. If it continues, then obviously I don't have an option of a free kick next. So I will have to move to a penalty if I don't see a change in your behaviour. And if teams don't understand, let's be quite smart about how we use our downtime sometimes. If a player's injured, let's go and find that whoever you think the best person within that front row, or it might even be a pack leader, to speak to, and refer back again to what you've referenced before the game in terms of, look, we agreed this, and this doesn't, to me, I don't feel this is happening, and this is the reason why. Can you please do X, Y, or Z to help me? And if that's their opportunity, then to say yes, hopefully. And if they then say, well, we think it's this and this, then okay, I understand where you're coming from, but I need to see this, and then it's the end of a conversation. So again, you've got the tools to use sanctions, but whilst you're using sanctions, that's when you've got to go to the next level of working a bit harder with your management to again try and get some sort of agreement so that the scrum can function properly.
Okay, brilliant. There's a couple of questions coming in. We're on the questions section now. Barnsley, we talked earlier around that safety and blowing the whistle at any point if we felt it was unsafe. Certainly from a community point of view, where we want to have a competition, but we're also mindful that these are community players. How do you approach an obvious physical mismatch from that safety perspective?
Well, I think, first of all, you've got to, going back to what we've discussed all the way through this webinar, is around taking your time to allow both teams to have a proper crack. And now, one team might be getting the upper hand, but it doesn't mean on every single scrum they're going to. So invest time in each scrum. Make sure that each scrum is refereed on its own merits. Now, if you've got a situation where a team keeps bailing out, they keep going on the floor, they don't want to engage in the scrum contest, you have the ability at senior rugby to say, hold on, fellas, we're gonna have to bring on players who will stay in the contest. As I said, you can go forward, you can go backwards, but don't go down, because then it becomes unsafe and I'll blow my whistle. Yeah, Matt's already picked up on the point. Is just because you're dominant doesn't mean that you can't be penalised, and you still have to be legal. So if a team wants to push an opposition player back, that's fine. They push. They don't run around. They push all three of them back. You don't get a loose head standing a tight head up, so that you gain advantage from that. But also, if it comes to the point where an opposition team doesn't have a scrum, then you of course you can say, look, I'm now worried about the safety of this particularly age grade. and say, look, I'm going to take these to uncontested scrums, so you can help me out in here. Imagine I still referee the local thirds and fourths down here in Richmond. If I've got a total mismatch, I'll say, look, fellas, look, you can't just keep putting this scrum on the floor. We'll have uncontested scrums and take away advantage. Use your advantage, put them under a bit of pressure, but be sensible about it. And that's building that relationship from the start as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Dave. If I can come to you, because you've obviously been looking at the questions for us and comments from the audience. What's coming through from there, please?
Yeah, a couple of generics refereeing the Scrum questions. So one from Aidan from the Edinburgh Society. Do you have a preference on which side you stand on to referee the Scrum?
I'll jump in there. I think we're very lucky, and this is, again, it's probably one of the big differences at the elite end. Obviously, we've got guys on the touchline week in, week out, so we can quite often stand on the infield and allow our assistant to cover the other side of the scrum with a lot of confidence. Obviously, from within England, from level 4 downwards, you don't have that luxury. You're lucky if the guy who's running touch for you hasn't had 2 or 3 pints in the pre-match middle. So I think your first port of call is probably to be on that putting inside for the first couple of scrums, just as a rule of thumb, so that you can be there with the nines as well as being on the side where the ball's being put in. And then you've got to try and pick up and have a feel for where your issues may be and where the most likely place you can either put some pressure on the scrum to be positive, or where you're going to be needed to make a decision. And if you're going to have to make several decisions from one side of the scrum, you might choose to put yourself there all the time. But if you're getting good positive responses from them players, then you can go to the sort of next level of sort of quality of refereeing, and that's being aware of which direction the team might play in, and gives you the best opportunity to move away from the scrum. But as a rule of thumb, I would say you probably want to pitch up with the two putting in scrum halves to start with, and then try and solve the puzzle best from there with your knowledge and understanding of what's going on in the scrum.
Yeah, and if there's a shit fight, as Matt says, there's a it's all going, all going down a downward spiral. Go and stand next to them. Like you wouldn't the line out. If there's something going on at the back of the line out, you go and stand at the back of the line out and say, right, let's try and sort this out, fellas. Or if there's something wrong on the front of the line out, you stand at the front and say, right, ladies, let's sort this out. Let's not have this all day. So having a presence sometimes is a huge advantage.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got a question in from an Andrew Small from Milton Keynes, who talks about stepping back off the mark. Barnesy, is that something that goes on, or is it sort of a bit of a myth?
I think Andrew Small from Milton Keynes should have called into this webinar a few years ago. It would have helped his refereeing quite a lot for Scrum. Look, I don't see it as a major issue in the community game. But what you've got to reinforce to both teams is it's stable on set. So that doesn't mean you hit and smash through the mark. That doesn't mean you set and step off the mark. It means stable in every direction. So if you're getting that and you can't decide, are they hitting through the mark? Are they stepping off it? You can just tell them the ball is not coming in until this is set. This is stable. So we'll set it, it'll become stable. So if you want resets all day, which no one does, then you keep messing about. But I'm now putting some onus on you as players to engage and stay stationary. I'm sure it does happen now and then, but I wouldn't be guessing unless I was certain.
Thank you. Dave, anything else from the questions at the moment?
Yeah, another generic one. So any tips on identifying deliberate wheeling in a scrum?
I think a lot of again, it comes back to what we've discussed in terms of it. Can you see the setup? Can you see players square at the start? If you're not getting that picture, then there might be a clue in that before you start. And if the scrum, putting inside of the scrum, start to move in that one direction before the ball comes in. Again, if we're insisting on that stability, we've got less chance of it happening. And then I think the best key there, if you've got time and you feel in the place where you can look there, it's the back five of the scrum and how their feet move. And then that maybe give you a good clue on how they come around the corner.
Cheers, Matt. Wayne, just a final question to you before we move to the next slide is obviously we had a question in from a Nick Wood from Gloucester, just someone's asking what was he actually like to referee in the scrum. I wonder if you can give a little bit insight of what Woody was like.
He was someone you could engage with, and that's, it's always the players who entertain you are the ones that I enjoy. And if players and coaches think that shouting at the referee for 80 minutes is going to get them the rub of the green, or it's going to get them that real crucial decision in the last minute of the game, then unfortunately they're mistaken. Whereas with Woody, he would be quite open to a discussion. He would put his hands up when he got shoved backwards, and would say, "Yeah, I did get my head shoved up my backside there," but we would have a crack at the next scrum. So you knew that you had to referee every single scrum with him. And he played with a really impressive Gloucester pack. So it just showed one impressive player he was. With the likes of Azam, with Nieto, two fantastic scrummaging players and individuals at Gloucester. But again, someone like Nick Wood, we've now got him involved in refereeing, but we should be, if you're at a game and Nick's there, whether he's at Radley, I think he's at Radley, isn't he? As a director of rugby there, you should be sitting down with these individuals afterwards saying, Nick, what did you think about those scrums? Do you think I get them wrong? You don't take it as an affront when he said, no, I don't think you got them all right. Get the clues, get the indicators there's such a wealth of knowledge out there. And if people are willing to talk to them, and you'll learn. You're a coach and you're coaching a level 4, level 3, and Nick turns up. Why not get an experience and someone who's played 200 times in the Premiership? There's not many people out there who's got that experience who's refereeing at the moment.
And the guys who play in the front row are a strange, unique breed, and they like talking about scrums. And you'll probably see the biggest smile on their face if you go and ask them about the scrums, and they'll probably chew your ear off for hours. So be prepared, but they love it, and you will find friends for life. Maybe not friends you want, but you'll have friends for life.
Well, I can certainly relate to that, Matt, because my boss is John Lawn, who used to allegedly play as hooker, and if I want to divert him from asking me difficult questions, I just ask him how a hooker throws in and give me some insight into that, and he'll go on for hours. He will, so absolutely. That takes us nicely into sort of some tips that we want to leave the guys with this evening, and I think we've really covered these off quite emphatically already. It's about that safety, and we've mentioned that several times, that if we need to blow that whistle because it doesn't look safe or something's not working the way it should be, is to stop the game. We've talked about and just mentioned there, Matt was quite strong around having a conversation with front row players and learning from them. They're a great source of information, as Barnsley alluded to, about Nick as well. And also, there's an opportunity, certainly once we get back into rugby, of getting down your local rugby club and helping out with scrum sessions. And again, there's so much learning goes on there. I'm quite fortunate. I get across to rugby club at Malvern, and when they've got sessions going on in training, just to support them with that. Is there anything else that you guys would be sort of thinking through when you start to get back into refereeing again? What you'll be thinking about for the scrum, Barnsley?
Love the scrum. Love the challenge that it brings. People who say, a scrum's not a competition anymore, go and watch a World Cup final and see what a competition it is. You can have some cracking rugby scrummaging contests. you can get some great insight afterwards. I think they're wonderful tips. Don't always take the car if you're gonna stay and have a chat with a couple of front rows, as Matt said. But really embrace this. Take this as a challenge, and you should enjoy refereeing the scrum because it is the unique thing about rugby union.
Brilliant. Thanks, Barnsley. Matt, any final words from yourself?
No, don't be scared of the scrum. Like what I said, it's unique to our sport, and it's something that you're never going to get away from. So you might as well embrace it, and you might as well be as good as you can be at managing it. And the better you can be, the more you'll enjoy it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. So really, guys, it just leaves it for me to say thank you very much for your time this evening. That hour has just flown by. Been really, really interesting. There have been literally hundreds and hundreds of questions coming up there. I really apologise to the guys and girls who've put those in that we couldn't respond to all of them, but we'll certainly do it. I'll take an opportunity to respond where I can after this evening. But again, just thank you for the opportunity to share your insight, your knowledge, fellas. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
David?
Yep, thanks, Michael. Thanks again, Wayne and Matt. That was a fantastic session.